So I'm just I'm an ordinary guy. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. I'm no different from anybody else, but trying to pursue awe and wonder has led me to some pretty cool things. So even as an ordinary person, I've been able to accomplish some pretty cool things. And by starting over with a little bit of the theme of the talks today, and not being afraid, you too can create a lot of awe and wonder in your life. So I'm going to talk about 4 different adventures in my life. And each one of them goes a little bit with the theme. So the first one I'm going to talk about is going to be an adventure in which the decision to start over was made for me. I had to restart. It wasn't my decision. I'm also going to talk about one where I do something, I leave for a while, and then I come back to that same task. I'm going to talk about hanging out with some people who have had to restart themselves, a forced restart in their lives. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about another adventure in which every single moment of it is a constant restart. So that's me. So the very first adventure is with this little guy here. This is a 49cc scooter. I'm on top of Mount Tabor in Portland, Oregon here. This was at the beginning of my trip. I was going to ride this scooter from Vancouver, Washington, down to Los Angeles, California. Then I was going to travel east, go all the way to Florida. Then I was going to ride it north all the way into Ohio, and then ride it back over to the Pacific Northwest, back to Portland, Oregon. So there was a lot of cool moments while I was out on this adventure. And one of them was on top of a mountain. So I went over a mountain summit that was 8,500 feet in elevation. So that's like 1.6 miles high. If you don't know anything about small carburetor engines, at sea level, this baby has a top speed of about 33 miles an hour. I was doing about 2 miles an hour when I went over the top of that tallest mountain. But a lot of fun, different adventures. Here I am at the bottom. And as you can see, I have my backpack there. Basically everything I owned, I took with me at this point in time. And just had the idea of I'm just going to drive it around the country. Alas, when I get to Hollywood, California, after about 1,500 miles, 10 days into my trip, my very first night there, somebody permanently borrows the bike from me. Yeah, that means that it got stolen by somebody. So the decision was made for me in that situation. If I could no longer continue on that adventure, I'm going to have to start over. So I rode back on an RV back to Oregon with some friends. Sans cool bike. Now, the second adventure is one in which I do something and then I go back to it. So one of the things I'm more well known for is doing burpees. So if you don't know what a burpee exercise is, it's where you start standing, you drop down to the floor, you jump back up and you clap your hands over your head. And then you repeat that. So I had this crazy idea. I was going to do this for 3 days. So these are actual pictures taken during the 3-day event. So I did burpees for 3 days. I did 9,480 of them. And for those who aren't very good at math, that's 1 every 30 seconds nonstop for 3 days was the pace that I helped there. So a couple years later, I had the crazy idea that I was going to do this again. But I wasn't going to go for 72 hours. I was only going to do 24 hours. 24 was going to be enough for me. But I did the same thing. So there's the 9:48 from the first one. Here's me doing it again, 24 hours, going through the same thing, doing a bunch of burpees again. Ended up doing 4,369 in the 24 hours, which is a little bit faster pace. That turns out to be it turns out to be 3 every minute nonstop for 24 hours. So I did something once. I didn't do burpees for a long time. Went back to it again later. There I am after the event, relaxing. So the third adventure I want to talk about, take a look at the cute little kittens, get a nice warm fuzzy feeling inside. I do a lot of disaster relief work. So I'll go someplace where somebody has had their restart made for them. They didn't choose to be part of that disaster, but the disaster happens. So a lot of times they're being forced to restart from nothing a lot of the time. So I hang out with a lot of these individuals. But I'm going to talk specifically about one where I went to Greece. I went over to Greece and I was working at a refugee camp. There were about 10 of us that were running a primary care clinic for a camp while we were there. So we had this camp. It was, most of the residents there were high need. So it could be a high medical need. It could be the fact that it was a widowed woman that had 7 children. It wasn't always medical, but it was something that they were the highest need individuals. There was a specific person there. She was this little girl. She was about 7 years old at the time. She had never walked before. She had cerebral palsy, so she had spent her entire life either in a wheelchair or being carried around by somebody. And we had a physical therapist there who worked with her for a couple of weeks and said, hey, if I can get a splint for her, we'll be able to get this girl to walk. Now, a splint was something that was ridiculously hard to find over in Greece during this time. You can't just go to the store and buy medical equipment, especially here. So we were trying to get somebody to send one over. We finally find one, but it's too long. So it's a solid piece of plastic. So here I am cutting it apart. I'm like, I've got some different epoxy stuff. I can cut this down to size and it should be able to fit the girl. And inevitably it worked. So I got this to the right size. She put it on and she walked down the hallway. That is, to me, a very awesome and awe moment. Of a young child had been told that she would never walk, but she did. The final event I want to talk about is where everything changes. I mentioned earlier that my final point, something that's constantly changing. So I set up this crazy little adventure 2 years ago where I was going to take a photo with 500 of my Facebook friends. This one here is the very first photo. That's my mother there with me. So she was the very first person I met in life, so I felt it fitting that she should be the very first person in my 500 Facebook friend photo challenge. Now, throughout this challenge, each one of them is its own little awe moment. So I meet up with some friends from college, go CWRU. Sometimes I hang out with some of my friends at the gym. There's a couple of other times where I reminisce about my childhood. And you can see there, if you've ever watched the TV show Peanuts, the little character named Linus who carries a blanket and sucks his thumb a lot, I'm playing him there. And then sometimes I stage some fights with some friends too. So this is our gladiator death match where 2 of us enter, only 1 of us leaves. Right? And here's a bunch of other photos there for you to take a look at. But each one of them is a snapshot in time of these cool all moments. Something very simple. It's just a photo. But people have called me that I haven't seen since high school, 20 years later, saying, hey, you're in town, we're gonna go take a photo together. Some people have it already staged if they know what they want to do in the photo. So like this one down here, she wanted to be dressed up in her unicorn outfit while I was in my little white tiger stripes there. So we each drove about an hour to meet up with each other just to take that photo. So I'd like to challenge you with this. If you can try something new and not be afraid to start over, think of the awe and wonder that you can create within your own life. Thank you.